Soulful Sauna, Stories of Self-Mastery. Thank you for joining us. It is you, the viewer, that makes this podcast. Your host, Juliette Noske, and her guests are here to share stories of self-mastery, to inspire you and ignite the power of positive change on your own journey. Thank you for being with us. Hello, everyone. And today's special guest that we have with us is Lis Cashin, a multi-award-winning speaker and best-selling author. She is the founder of the Self-Worth Revolution, designed to elevate women's self-worth and unlock their leadership potential. And drawing from her own experience and inspirational journey of navigating complex trauma, Lis guides women in identifying the barriers hindering their path to become authentic and empowered leaders. Welcome, Lis.
Oh, thank you, Juliette. It's lovely to be here.
And thank you for offering up your time to come on the podcast. And I'm sure your stories will inspire lots of people out there, lots of our listeners. So we have known each other quite a long time now, and you certainly inspire me with your stories. Can you remember when your journey started of awakening and self-mastery?
Yes, so it was on a sales training course of all the places, and at that time in my life I was in my late 20s, and really I was spiraling out of control. I'd had a very traumatic childhood and really sort of went off the rails. I was living a dual life, actually. I went to uni, went into work, but the other side of it was I was going out, I was taking drugs, trying to numb the pain that I was feeling and feeling ashamed of, because mental health wasn't even a thing back then. And I went on this sales training course, and my self-worth was low, my self-confidence was low. And it was Dale Carnegie, who was an American philanthropist, and he wrote books like all I can think of is that How to Win Friends and Influence People. I was thinking, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That's one of the actual sort of quotes from it. But in it, he said, think and act positively and you will become positive. And people talk about light bulb moments, but actually it was like a physical thing for me. I remember reading it, I got tingles. It was like a recognition, like a remembering, but on a sort of really deep level. And as I say, at that time, I was so closed off. I was really in a bad space. And, my life really was sort of in a rock bottom. And yeah, I just remember thinking, God, what, you mean I have a choice here? I've got choice, that actually if I can learn how to think positively, then I can feel more positive. And at that point, I just felt all this sort of unresolved trauma and, thinking, why was I born, just to create so much misery for other people. It was really a dark time. And then suddenly there was this light that was like possibility and hope. And yeah, I felt a bit emotional there, but yeah, it really was that sort of significant. And I remember we had a competition at the end, because it was a sales training and it was an external thing with lots of different organizations, and I came runner up in this competition, and the guy who was running it gave me this special prize, he said, because I have such a zest for life. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't have felt further from that at that point. But that proved to me that actually how other people see me isn't necessarily how I feel inside. And I think I'd got so good at wearing masks from having to do that to survive growing up, that this is how he perceived me. And, I do believe now that we can be all of those different things at the same time. It's not just I'm this or I'm that, but actually I can hold all of those. But that was the turning point. And I remember going home that night, and I was in a house share at the time. with my friend Lisa, and I walked in and it was like a default reaction. She said, "How are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm shattered. I've been on this course and blah." And I said, "Hang on a minute, I'm going to go out and come back in again." And she said, "What?" Just looking at me like, "Have you gone mad?" And so I walked out, knocked on the door, came in, and she said, "How are you?" And I said, "Yeah, it's been a long day, but I've been on this course and I've learned lots of great new things." And I felt like I sort of put it into practice straight away, that I had that choice. I was shattered. It had been a long day. I wasn't feeling great, but actually there was also really good things happening. And so I chose to focus on them. And so that was the turning point in my late 20s.
Yeah. There's a few things there. There's the fact that, we find our growth spurts and our pivotal moments anywhere in life, really. And for everyone, it can be quite different. And there's also that, changing your thoughts and your mindset. It's not just changing your thoughts and your mindset. It actually changes, then impacts how you act and what you're focusing on, as you did with coming back in the room there at the end. And yeah, fantastic.
I remember in the weeks that followed, I kept putting it into practice. So I was waiting for at the station with a friend, and we're on this particular station, there's like 3 or 4 different lines that passed through, and so every time the next one came and it wasn't ours, the default was to go, "Oh." And actually when it came, I said, "Oh, that means we're one step closer to our train." It was all of those little things. Ours might be next. It was those little moments where I started to reframe things, and I started to feel better.
Yeah. Oh, wow. How fantastic. And can you tell us what is a fun and true but crazy fact about you?
I think probably that I spent nearly a year in India, and as a part of that, I went to Sri Lanka, and I ended up in a meditation center there. And I remember I'd just gone there, and obviously people were in silence because it was a meditation center, but they could talk at different times. And I saw these people with in silence badges, and I was curious, and I found out that they were doing solo retreats. So there was the sort of joint retreats. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I'd already done a 10-day Vipassana meditation, which is completely in silence, over in India. And I thought, okay, let me see if I can do a solo retreat. So I went to talk to the guy who ran the place, and he said, and someone else had asked just before me, and she was told no, that he didn't think she was ready. So I was sort of prepared for that. And he said, "Yeah, I think that'd be really good for you, Liz." Yeah, I think 3 weeks. 3 weeks will be good. And I was like, "Oh, 3 weeks on my own in silence." And he said, "Yeah, I think that would be really good for you." So I did 3 weeks in a solo retreat, and yeah, it was crazy. Literally, I got to really observe the craziness of my mind. And if you think that actually back then, a lot of things I did were potentially very dangerous, because I really had major and complex trauma as a child and had no help at all to come to terms with any of it. And there I was, putting myself in this deeply sort of meditative place, which is really looking at what's going on. And looking back now, I think, oh my, some of the things that I've done literally were crazy, but I got to see a lot of those things happening. But I also got to observe peace and joy and connection. And so it was it was amazing. But I think twice I actually went to speak to the teacher, and it was because I literally thought I was losing my mind, and I was like, I really just need to get some perspective. And one time he told me to go back and draw nature, which really helped. He said, "You're going in too deep, so we need to pull you out a little bit." So I was like drawing nature and connecting. But yeah, there was one woman who went there, Canadian lady, and she'd done a similar thing, and she'd never left. So she was just constantly there. So he was very aware of that. Very aware of that actually that can happen when you go really, really deep. You don't ever really want to come back. So I sort of kept one foot in reality, but yeah, it was amazing. But I remember because this was about, let me see, maybe about 10 years after the Dale Carnegie revelation. So I'd done a few different things in that time, but I was really suffering, mentally suffering. And I remember as I was dropping through these layers in the meditation, I got to the point where the pain was just so great, like I really couldn't bear it. And it was like, I remember sort of crying out, but internally, like I literally, I can't take this anymore. And I remember saying, I've suffered enough. I've suffered enough. Like whatever's happened, whatever I did, whatever life has given to me, like this is it. I can't do this anymore. And I really felt like it was, could have gone one way or the other, I think. But fortunately, I felt in that moment that it's like my heart broke open a bit for myself for the first time. And self-compassion was born, which was again a revelation in my life, but something that I then could build on from there. Yeah, it was such a sort of cry to life, like I have suffered enough. I know, quite powerful.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to being down on my knees in a pool of sweat and tears and those moments where you reach a point and calling out to God, source, or whatever you want to call it, universe. And I just wanted to touch on something that you spoke about when you said, you're not sure how safe it was, but you must have felt safe, being there. Because I know like the 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, some people, literally cannot do that. I had a client recently, she had to come away, but then she actually continued at home. So she did it, but she continued at home. But you must have felt held and safe in it somewhat to stay there and to continue.
Yeah, I did. I think I trusted the teacher, and the place itself was beautiful. It was like at the top of a tea plantation in south of Kandy in Sri Lanka. So it just looked out across these hills, and we didn't have electricity. So there was like they used gas to make the food. They had candles. Yeah, I did feel held. You're right. I did feel held. And I think I'd got to the point where I just thought, I just got to give this. I was in so much mental pain that I couldn't bear it. I literally couldn't bear it. Like, I don't think I could have carried on living with that level of it was mental torture. And I know now through trauma, gently is the best way to approach trauma. Whereas I was just diving into these experiences because I was desperate, really. I was desperate to find the answer. But what they all did was bring me into a connection with myself. And then that's been that lifelong connection, lifelong journey. And I don't know if there ever is an end point for someone like me who's had all of that, in their nervous system and in their mind. But I have so many tools now to navigate life and to be able to hold myself if I do feel like I'm going through another, difficult patch. And I just accept it. I don't judge myself anymore, which is the key.
And may I ask what some of those tools are that you use?
Yeah, so mindfulness is definitely one. And I think putting myself in those extended things like 10 days in Vipassana or 3 weeks in Sri Lanka, those extended periods really helped me to develop my practice. And I also did a mindfulness practitioner training. So I did 5-day retreats in a year as a part of that. So that all helped to me to embody it, I think, rather than, so I was sort of stop, start. I think I know a lot of people I know can relate to this, but you know, you remember to meditate when you remember to do it, but most of the time you forget, and then suddenly it's you go through something difficult. It's like, oh, I must meditate. So it's, you know, all of these patterns. But I find now that I'm sort of more mindful in my life. I still do mindful practices, but I'm just more mindful and aware and able to respond rather than react the majority of the time, I would say. You know, so it's given me more of that stability. So that's been a key tool. And in that comes acceptance. And I think that, so whatever is happening, I accept it. I don't resist it. It's like, I may not want it, but I don't resist it. I try and open to it, which again is counterintuitive. You know, if something difficult comes, we want to say, no, I don't want this. And I may notice those feelings, but then I try and open to it and allow whatever it is. And through that practice, I also, it was quite a powerful visualization, realizing, starting to reparent myself. And so I've become the parent to those traumatized younger me's. So I am able to actually talk to them or embrace them internally and give them what they didn't get at the time and what they desperately needed, which was love and acceptance, and compassion. So I thought, you know, I was going to find this sort of monster living inside of me once I started to do all this processing. And what I realized was there was no monster. It was just a traumatized child, you know, who didn't get the support and love that she deserved and needed. And so it's been a beautiful process and also challenging. But that's been that, you know, constant connection to myself. And if I get triggered by something, so if I have an emotional reaction to something, now I see that as a gift. It's like, okay, what is there still within me that needs some love? It needs a bit of attention. And so awareness, mindfulness, they're all linked, aren't they? Connection, compassion has come through that as well. I think they're the main ones that have really supported me. I've also got, you know, had over the years lots of different therapies, but EMDR has really helped me, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a bit of a mouthful, but EMDR. And that has really helped me to access the emotions and the feeling in my body and help me to make a change internally. So I'm not afraid to reach out for professional help if I feel like, okay, something deeper is coming up. It's almost like a part of my strategy, if you like. It's like, oh, hang on, I think I need a bit of help with this. I also talk about my story, or, you know, I've talked about it in depth. And that was a huge part of my healing. You know, I did a TED talk, written a book about it, and that was all part of the healing as well, because I'd been so ashamed of how I felt for so long that what I realized was shame exists in silence. And so the more we can talk about it and be more vocal, if we feel safe to do so, then that can be a part of our healing as well. So lots of things that I do, that I reach out for, or that I've done externally. I think it's been a combination of things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. Shame lives in the silence.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you think about it, we often say a problem shared is a problem halved, because I feel it's like getting it out of your head makes it much smaller, whereas in our head sometimes it tends to grow. So yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to be a trusted person, I think, that you talk to. I think this is the thing. We often hear like, oh, talk to someone, but actually if you talk to the wrong person, it can actually create more damage. So it has to be someone that you trust, or maybe go to an organization that has people who are trained, that can listen and give you that objective support, I think. Just to add that in.
Yeah. And then you can get to perhaps rewrite that story as well. Is that something that you've done?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think, there was, as in my story, I was the villain, if you like. I was the bad person. And, then I became actually the innocent child who was traumatized. So that's quite a shift in narrative. And, I really believed as a child that I was evil and I deserved to be punished. I mean, they are very difficult beliefs to live your life by. I found many ways to punish myself in lots of, even the food that I ate, I would beat myself up about that. And of course, we have to eat. So it was a brilliant way to keep punishing myself, or being in, really destructive relationships, or taking drugs. All of these ways I found. But they also, I also survived through those things. So it's like, I just want to give myself some credit for doing whatever it took, I think, to get through. But yeah, it's definitely been a shift in narrative. And also, I think the biggest shift in the story is that I love myself. I used to hate myself and now I love myself. And so my life is just very different in all areas now.
Mm. And what's having you glow at the moment in your life?
Oh, I like that. I just started a master's degree in January this year. And I didn't know how it was going to go. I haven't studied like that since at uni, 30 years ago. And postmenopausal brain is changed from how it was before. I'm also working, I run my own business. And so, but, I do like to go on these adventures, as you probably gather. And I love to learn. And so I started this master's in applied positive psychology in organizations and leadership. And the first term that we've done is all about the study of happiness and well-being from an evidence-based perspective. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm just fascinated by everything. And what I realize is, I've been a coach for 20 years. I've been using lots of sort of self-help tools and activities and exercises, but this is evidence-based, this is research-backed, and it's adding a much deeper layer to my practice. I think in one of my essays, I said I've been building foundation. It's like building foundations of a house I didn't know I needed to dig. It's only in getting that I'm like, oh gosh, this is so good. This is adding sort of real depth to it. So we've got positive psychology at work coming up in September that I'm really excited about. So yeah, it's all about the study of how individuals, leaders and teams can thrive.
Wow.
So good for me on my own personal journey, as well as being able to share that with others. But yeah, I could talk about this. I could talk about that with you all day. They say, like, psychology, if you imagine it, is like from -10 to 0. And if people are really struggling with their mental health, traditional psychology tries to get you into a 0 place, like, okay, I'm okay. But positive psychology tries to take you to +10. It's like, okay, now, what actually can you do to thrive, not just be okay? So I love that.
Yeah. And are there any books that you've read in positive psychology that really stand out for you?
Most of them are sort of textbooks, which I'm sure people wouldn't like, but I'm reading this book at the moment, which is really good. Stumbling on Happiness, by Daniel Gilbert. And yeah, there's so many sort of gems coming out. I love these little things. And I think what I've learned is if we try and be happy, the research shows that we will fail, because and what happiness is means lots of things to lots of different people. But it's more really about looking at how we can get a greater well-being, and happiness will follow. It's really interesting, exploring all those different things. But yeah, Stumbling on Happiness is a good book.
Thank you. And can you tell us about the things that you're working on at the moment? So the self-worth revolution.
Yeah. So I've been running doing talks and webinars and trainings for women, and there's such a recognition when I deliver them from women. It's like we're all sort of waking up to the fact that for many different reasons, but a lot of it through our childhood. We've developed this sense of self that isn't perhaps supportive if we are wanting to be our authentic selves. You know, I know when I was growing up, most of the TV presenters were men, radio presenters were men, politicians were men. We had Margaret Thatcher came in as the example of a woman in power. In my house, my mum did all the housework, she did all the cooking, she went to work. You know, those role models of women and men weren't very empowering, shall we say. And, you know, women were more submissive. They put up with a lot more. And so I think unknowingly we've got these beliefs, we've got all these things in our unconscious that are holding us back. So when we go for a promotion at work and it's a man, potentially, all of these things can kick in and we're not sure what's happening. We just know we feel anxious or we don't feel worthy to go for it. So a lot of us have imposter syndrome, where we just don't feel worthy. We don't feel good enough. We think we're going to be found out. And men have it too. But we know that the majority of women, 75% of executive women in research said that they struggle with imposter syndrome. That's a lot. So, you know, how can we be authentic leaders if we're all struggling with imposter syndrome and feeling we're going to get found out? And that's a process of, you know, what does it mean to be authentic? I know you've done some work with me in the past, Juliette, where we did that, you know, integrity, personal responsibility, authenticity. So it's about exploring those things and looking at what do they mean to us? What is my integrity? What does it mean to me to be in my integrity? How do I express myself authentically? So they're all the things that I'm delivering at the moment. I absolutely love it. Again, as you can see, it's taken me so many years, but now I feel like I'm really aligned with who I am. So I'm more my authentic self.
Yeah. I was actually watching a program on Gaia TV, the growth mindset version of Netflix. And
Yes.
It was talking about civilizations of women leaders, you know, long time ago, and they found these places where all the leaders were women, and there was hardly any, there weren't the wars that there are now, and things were completely, you know, led completely differently, and they found evidence of these places. So yeah, it's almost like we're now coming back into our power.
Yes.
And I think sometimes that unfolding that's happening is a part of the journey, you know, and going from, you know, being disempowered to now finding our power, maybe going to some extreme where we almost become men in that. But it's like what you said earlier about acceptance and accepting what is. For me, it's like maybe this is a part of the journey of learning about ourselves. And but I love that you're focusing your work on that. I also run a women's circle, and I think it's very important to have that space where we can come together. And it's not that we're excluding men, it's just that it's a space where we can come together and heal and look at certain topics. And is there a topic that you've been looking at lately? I know you mentioned a few things, but is there one thing that you've been focusing on that's really inspiring you at the moment?
I think that the whole self-worth, like what is it? How do we get it? And what I've realized is it's who we are. So we are born worthy. You know, have you ever seen a baby that wasn't worthy of love and belonging? I mean, if anybody has, I'd be questioning that person, I think, because we're born, that's who we are. That's how we're born. And so if that's how we're born, and then now we're feeling like an imposter, then something's happened between then and now to impact that. So the great news is we don't have to do anything to be worthy. It's more a process of delayering than having to find it out there. Oh, I need to find my worth. No, you are worthy. That's the great news. It's just you've forgotten. and you believe that you're not, and so you've created a whole strategy around that. But actually coming back to that place which is within you of worth is the key. And then how do you operate from that place? What decisions would you then make from that place? What's different now than when you didn't believe it before? So yeah, that's the great news is it's all inside of us. It's just that process of delayering and uncovering and transforming beliefs that just, we may have created for survival growing up, or it might just have been the society that we were growing up in and we wanted to fit in. But actually, what does Brené Brown says, the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And I love that. So when we belong to ourselves. We're just happy. We belong. We really feel that in our hearts. But when we're trying to fit in, it's like we're trying to fit in with other people. We lose ourselves then. And we do it because we want to survive growing up. We want to be loved. We want to be liked. But actually, we can lose ourselves in that. And so when we really feel belonging and we're okay with that, it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks because we belong to ourselves.
Yeah, I can totally resonate with that as part of my journey.
And mine.
Yeah.
And mine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was desperate to fit in. I mean, I was like a chameleon. I would just be around people and think, right, how are they acting? How are they speaking? What are they wearing? And I'd try and adapt myself to fit in, to not get that rejection that I'd felt so much growing up. But oh gosh, it was very painful. And then I just had no idea who I was because I was constantly trying to adapt. It's like, well, who am I then? I had no idea. So that's been a process of discovery.
Yeah, and very much like you say, a survival mode. I definitely feel that with mine. It was a part of, being able to survive. And how would you recommend that people bring that awareness? Because sometimes, all these various things, they're hidden, aren't they? They're in the shadows, or they're in our blind spots. And sometimes the people around us see us, and then years later, when we find out, they're like, I've been trying to tell you for years. So how would you how would you recommend that people find out about these things that are in their blind spots and hidden from them, if they're like interested to look?
I think it's like something sort of gets ignited in you. That's what happened with me with the Dale Carnegie. Is like, ooh, there's this curiosity and interest. Like, ooh, hang on, let me find out more about this. And it opened this huge Pandora's box that I think I'm still working through. And then I became fascinated and passionate about it. But I think, I mean, honestly, for me, it's been a process of learning to tap into and trust my intuition, which has then led me to finding the missing pieces of my puzzle. But starting out, it was that curiosity, it was that wanting to know more. And that curiosity will lead you to a book or a podcast or a webinar or a course or a therapist or a traveling trip or a friend. That's really what I believe is when you want that, when it was some part of you, and I believe actually that all of us want that on some level, but once that gets ignited in you, then it's about taking action. So for example, my journey, my continuing journey is in my body. My poor nervous system was on fight, flight, freeze for decades, and so it's still a journey for me trying to be more embodied and settle my nervous system. And I set that intention. So setting clear intention that's what you want is a good first step. So I set that intention, let it go, and then I was out with a friend, and she'd brought a couple of friends. We were going to go walking in the Cotswolds, which I love. I used to live there, and we were in the car, and this woman started talking about how she'd been through a lot of trauma. I didn't know her. She didn't know my intention. She'd been through a lot of trauma, and she'd found this amazing cranial osteopath. who's actually about half an hour from where I live, and how he had been the missing piece for her. She tried so many people, but actually he, was amazing. So I had to be looking out on some level for the signs. I could have completely missed that, but I said, "Oh, can I have his number? What's his name? Where is he? Tell me more about that." So because I'd set intention, it was like my radar went out. And then, radars are always looking to pick things up. And then, oh, I heard it. And I was like, oh, I'd love to know more about that. Checked out the website and thought, oh, this looks really interesting. Let me go and have a session. And he's just incredible. So it's those kind of things as well. I might have completely missed that sign and not found this guy. Someone said to me, why do you always find these people that you're looking for? And I said, because I'm open to it and I'm set intention and I'm aware. And so when they present themselves, I'm ready and I follow it up. And sometimes my intuition takes me I think, really? Am I going there? And then I find out, like, I had a conversation or something that I really needed.
Yeah. And I think sometimes as well, the message is often sent 3 times, for example, like a book is mentioned by someone and then someone else is talking about it and then you see it on a shelf and
yeah, it's so true. And you think, right, I need to buy that book because this is the 3rd time this week somebody's mentioned it to me. I do that a lot. It's like, right, okay, I need to, because people are talking about things all the time, but then you have to discern what is, what have I been asking for, and then what's being presented to me. And if this is the 3rd time, then maybe life is knocking on my door saying, come on, buy the book.
Yeah, and some people say that your gift is your gifts you need to go through your wounds. So if you think of your your life experience and the trauma that you experienced, how would you say that has ignited your gift and your soul expression and what you bring to the world?
I think it's cracked me open, I think is the best way to describe it. I think, in the first part of my life, it was all so dark and so painful. And then in my 20s, there was that sort of spiraling out of control and not knowing what was happening. And then that glimmer of hope through the Dale Carnegie, and then following that thread led me to go traveling. And someone gave me Reiki, and I had this amazing spiritual experience that I was not expecting, didn't know what was going on. So I think there's all of these sort of threads then that we can choose to follow or not throughout our lives. I can't remember what the question was. I got lost in my threads.
About how your past has then brought you to do the work in the world. Yeah.
So it absolutely forced me to, and I say that deliberately, because I was in so much pain. And like I said before, I think I got to the point where I was like, I couldn't bear it anymore. And so I did have a choice. And I think, at that point, I was really contemplating suicide because I just couldn't take the pain. And, I can really understand why some people choose that option, or I don't mean that as I don't say that lightly. And for some people, it's just the pain is just so great. I can understand why they would do that, because I've come so close in my life a couple of times. But fortunately, something pulled me through, like in that meditation when I just, and I sort of released it by saying, I've suffered enough. It was like that then allowed me to release and open up, whereas I'd been holding it all before. It sort of enabled me to open up, and then for that healing journey to carry on. So it was everything on my journey.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be who I am now without that experience or experiences.
Yeah. So what drives you forward then? What visions do you have of for yourself in the now, but also in the future?
It's really interesting because I've always been sort of strongly driven by visions, like my book and um, speaking, and then I did the TED talk and things like that. I was always had that, and I feel it's really interesting. So I'm coming to a place now where I'm more in the moment, and I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen, and I'm not attached to that. And it feels much sort of better. I'm seeing what's evolving. I'm doing the masters. Obviously, I'm putting intention into that. And it feels like new things are now emerging. I just don't know where they're going to lead me, but I'm okay with that. Feels exciting. This is my, it's like when I've gone off traveling, I've done 2 big traveling trips, and when I'm on the plane and I've left my life and I've no idea what's going to happen, that's when I'm at my happiest. And for some people that's terrifying because they need to know everything, and I'm like, just let me have an open playing field, and that's where I'm at my happiest. Like, ooh, because then everything's possible.
Yeah, I feel that's a bit in the theme of the world at the moment, is that kind of space of really not knowing, where everything's been thrown up into the air and we're kind of waiting to see
Yeah.
what settles and what takes. And yeah, because I definitely feel that, and have heard that from people that I listen to out there in the world. But like you say, some people really can't take that, and they find that moment of, it's almost like pure liberation, because like anything could occur from that space of nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I lived with PTSD for so long that I'm surprised that doesn't terrify me, that, because anything could happen, because I have lived with that fear and the, hypervigilance for a long time, like constantly risk assessing because something really awful might happen, because it did happen to me. But it's like the flip side of that. Maybe I can't have that expansive excitement without the other. I don't know, but I do believe we're in this world of polarities. So trust and surrender. That's what I've learned. Just trust, surrender, and keep showing up, keep following my intuition. And it seems to lead me ever more into connection with myself.
Yeah. Thank you. And when you wrote your book, what there's 2 questions. What inspired you to write your book, and who did you see as being your audience? So if there are people out there listening, how would they know that this book is definitely for them?
So I think the book wanted to be written. It just wouldn't leave me alone. It was like the seed of an idea that just kept going and coming back to me and coming back to me. You need to write your story. You need to write your story. And I was nervous about doing that because the trauma that I went through isn't just my story, it's also other people's. And so I was very mindful of that. And so I did get permission from some people before I wrote it that they would be okay. But I felt like I just needed to write it down. It was part of my healing, I think. Just it was very cathartic. I sort of relived through lots of things as I was writing it, but it also enabled me to share all the brilliant things that I've learned. And that was the key focus. It wasn't just like I need to share the trauma. It was like I wanted to share what has supported me up to that point that I wrote it, that has really helped, like the meditation experience and all of that is in the book, and the EMDR and lots of other things as well that have helped me along the way. And so who I really wanted to read it was people who are in their own process of feeling stuck, or they're awakening and they're not sure, maybe they've been through a trauma and there's no sense to it, and that maybe they could find some hope through my book. I had one of the most beautiful, and I mean, I know you're going to get this, Juliette, but I sold my car. I went to Bali a few years ago and I sold my car before I went. And just totally randomly on Auto Trader. It didn't say anything about me, doesn't say your name or anything like that. So the guy who decided to buy it turns up with his wife, and I had some of my books that were going into storage because I was going off to Bali. It was all we were at the storage unit where we were. And my sister said, "Oh, Lis has written a book." And the woman buying my book said, "I know, I've read it. In fact, I bought it with me." Because by that point, I'd emailed her husband and she'd realized who I was. And she already had my book and she bought it. I got goosebumps to sign it so I could sign it. And she said, "Yeah, I first heard about you when you had your story in the Guardian newspaper a few years ago. And I work with people who have mental health issues. And we see you as a beacon of hope."
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, and that I still get emotional now. I got emotional at the time. I mean, all the coincidences of that, and also the beautiful message for me. So that's really why I wrote it.
Yeah, it brings tears to my eyes, definitely. And you know, the same for me when someone says they've listened to my podcast and it's inspired them, or you know, they've gained something from it. It helps me to keep going and to know that I'm on the right path and that the work I'm doing has value, even if it touches 1, 2, or 3 people out there.
Yeah. And that was it. When I wrote it, I thought, if this helps one person, it has been worth it. And you know, that was and I've had, you know, other people say that it supported them. So so that's it. And it also helped me then to evolve beyond it. It's almost like I had to get it out there, and I was talking about it a lot. I was talking about the trauma. And then I got to a point coming back from Bali. I was actually on TV, Channel 4, Steph's Packed Lunch. It was a live TV, and I was talking about the trauma because I was in a book about forgiveness from the Forgiveness Project, who I support. And I was talking about it, and as I was saying it, I thought, this is the last time I want to share this so publicly, because it was actually quite traumatic for me as well, having to keep reliving it. And it felt like after that, it's like, okay, now the book is there, the TED Talk is there, my interviews are there. If people want to hear more about the story, they can. If they Google me, you'll see it. It'll come straight up. It's been in papers and all sorts. But I wanted to evolve as me and who I am now and what I can share from me now. Because I've learned so much, but it's now about who I am rather than who I was.
Yeah. So going beyond it, I really resonate with that, definitely. And so tell me a bit about your TED Talk. How was that experience?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. But it was like my book was coming out. Then I met someone who was a journalist who said, "Can I publish your story in the Guardian?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that would be great." And then the book came out, and just before I saw this advert for TED Talk, and I thought, "Oh, should I apply for that?" Applied for it, found out the next day I was accepted. I mean, that's unheard of. And the TED Talk came out 2 weeks after my book. I mean, it was a lot. It was all coming out together. And it was called Mental Health Awakening, Suffering is Surmountable. And it was talking about how it's our thoughts that can create the suffering. And I was, there was the whole day of talks, and I think I was second to last. It was excruciatingly painful having to wait all day. But I'm incredibly proud of myself for doing that, for getting up and doing it. I'd rehearsed it so much that I was able to just say it because I was absolutely inside, panicking and terrified, but I managed to appear calm and confident. So that was the main thing. I'd like to do another TED Talk, I think maybe in a year's time, bringing all of the masters' knowledge in around happiness and well-being and things like that. I think there's a lot there to share.
Yeah. So it feels like this is, since you've had all those experiences, this is like a new chapter, as it were, a new phase. But you don't know where you're headed.
No. How exciting. Yeah, it just all feels just feels good. I think you can't get better than that. If it feels good, then I think you're on the right path.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience?
I think just learn to follow your heart. I think we're all so stuck in our heads, and we're like walking around sort of disembodied heads, you know, we're all stuck in our mind and our thoughts and stressful thoughts, and actually we have a body for a start, and we have a heart, and the heart wisdom is very, very powerful. And you know, science is proving this now, that it might even have more intelligence than the brain. And I think learning to tune into this, learning what that is, and learning how to follow that can really transform your life. And I think that's the journey that I've been on and continue to follow.
Continue to follow your heart. Yeah. The lady that I just interviewed is creator of the Heart of the Rose Festival, and she talks about the way of the rose, which is the way of the heart, but also embodying, so coming into the body. Where enlightenment has been out there, it's about coming into the body and that experience. Yeah. And with it,
I think that's part of the big shift that we're all going through.
Yes, yes. With the is it MDR?
EMDR.
Oh, that's right. EMDR.
Eye movement.
Yeah. With the EMDR, what was your most profound shift with that?
The most profound shift was realizing that I was just an innocent child, going to school, doing what she was told, and there was nothing evil in me, that, you know, that actually I had a right to be safe as a child and I wasn't protected. I think that was the greatest realization.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Liz. It's been wonderful having you on the podcast. And for all our viewers out there and our listeners, coming back into your heart and leading with your heart is the way forward. So thank you very much, and see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Juliette. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Soulful Sauna podcast. We appreciate your continued support. Feel free to leave us a rating, share with your family, friends, and loved ones. I have a question to leave you with. What inspired you from today's podcast, and what actions are you going to take as a result? Time to tell your own story of self-mastery.